Yo, what up? This Big Capadon, the Wu-Tang in the building. Big shout out to my man JV. You already know, man. Shoot the work, man. Keep your eye on the prize. Let's go.
Welcome everyone back to Curiosities. And as we approach the conclusion of summer 2024, like many people out there, I'm set here wondering and pondering the world we live in. Sometimes for good, sometimes not so good. And there's politics that plays into that because it's always a very contentious topic. But I think society at large is really where we find most of the imbalances that I think shake up all of our insides when we start thinking about the world around us and the world we live in the future, really. And so with me, I have a guest that I'm going to have on that was kind enough to have me on his show recently. His show is called the Superficial Podcast. And we'll bring him on. We'll introduce him and let him tell you a little bit more about himself. And we'll get right out into the topic. But before we do that, do me a favor. If you're not a subscriber yet, please subscribe to this channel. Share this video with others and hit that like button at any point you start realizing you like this stuff, man. These conversations, sometimes they get really well. And special thanks to my friend, Mr. Capadonna from the Wu-Tang Clan. Thank you for that introduction. That was sweet. That was nice. And, he's a cool cat, man. He's a lot cooler than you think in real life. Anyways, everyone, welcome to the show, Mr. Ashwin. Ashwin from the Superficial Podcast. And what a name for a podcast, especially when we're talking about pop culture and its influence on society. We'll talk about superficial. Who could be more superficial than pop culture icons? Huh, Ashwin?
You put it that the right way, yes.
What gave you the inspiration to call your podcast the Superficial Podcast?
Well, it's a play on irony, right? So on the show, we go into depth on so many different topics. So it kind of plays to the opposite way of presenting it to the audience. Not just touching on that superficial layer, but we go way past that.
Oh, I see now. I see, said the blind man. So when you think about the deepest, what's the deepest conversation you've had or deepest guest you've had on your show? Tell us a little bit about that.
The deepest guest was a very good friend of mine, Brahmachari Hari Chaitanya. So he's, for a lack of a better word, he's a monk, but he's celibate. And so we really went into depth on the power of discussion and how the current society has lost their point of view and the purpose of it. So we live in a world today where people debate each other to beat the other person. But that's not how it should be. But they should debate so that they're both in the seeking of truth, right? We're both going towards that same goal to find out what we both want to find out and what will help us improve.
You know what's interesting, Ashwin, is that when you think about world religions and really anything that has to do with that deep philosophy about life and truth, there always seems to be a disassociation from the things that normal people do in everyday life. There's always seems to be like, in order to find that, in order to embrace it or to wherever it come to the epiphany of it, you have to separate yourself from the everyday norms, the mundane, if you will, the work, the love, the passion, sex, for example.
Well, JB, that's the thing, right? It's application. Everyone is keen to learn, but no one wants to apply it into their daily lives. Everyone's different. That's pretty established. But how can you take the same lesson and apply it to your life in a way that it helps you? So you have to ask yourself the questions that really matter.
See, which brings us to our topic of pop culture. When you think about pop culture, these are all the superficial items of the world that we live in, right? The people who like music, they depending on what style or genre of music they prefer, you lose yourself in that. I don't know if you've ever been to a rave. I've been to a rave once or twice in my life, and I remember walking out of there going, what the hell are people attracted to this sport? It's like so bizarre to me. It's waving these glow sticks around and all this stuff. Like,
what is I've never been to a concert, so I don't get it.
Well, I've been to a lot of those, and there's I get it. I think it's easier to fall into the decadence of the world. Because I think the decadence offers you it offers you a chance to do things without responsibility, at least on its face. It appears as though you're letting go of responsibility. You're letting go of the hard things in life, letting go of those disciplines I think you were alluding to. What do you
What's the
think?
downside of that though? You lose everything.
Of course. Well, I mean, the downside of it is you become shallow. You become very superficial. Not to pounce on that word so much, but you become, I think, less of a. I think you become more of an animal, if that makes any sense, because your impulses you react to things like an animal would. You know,
Well, I don't want to demonize this in such a way that is horrible, but I would like to preach the importance of balance, right?
sorry, I
Like
went too extreme on
it's
you.
yes. Well, it's
Sorry.
okay to go to concerts and raves, but as long as you know that I'm having fun now, but life is waiting for me. So I
Well, I
gotta
mean,
get back to it.
I'm not suggesting people do that and don't, but we know that there are people that do that. Just that's their entire lives. I think I've related to people that have done that and died early. But anyway. But let's stick with what pop culture really is. If we could try to define that, pop culture is what I think the shimmering, the glimmering, the shiny stuff, the clothes, the cars, the showing yourself, you're being that feathered peacock as you're walking down the street. I think that's what pop culture essentially is, and I understand why people are attracted to it. I'm not going to suggest that I wasn't and haven't been attracted to that, but I do think that it also contributes to the rot of society.
I like to call it superficial unity. I don't want to say superficial over and over again, but
Again, I'm going too extreme for you. You'll find that
well,
about me, man.
you come across so many ideas that bring people together in a certain culture, right? Of course, they're going to hold on to it. So there's also the thing where can I put in my own original ideas into this, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we're looking too deep into it. Maybe it's just a matter of having a minimum amount of choices. When you think about a football game, for example, or a baseball game, you have two sides. You have two teams. You're rooting for one or you're rooting for the other. You look at politics. You're looking at one candidate versus another. You're looking at music. You like this band over that band, or I mean, it just seems like people want to minimize their choices. It makes it simpler for them. Or am I just reading too much into it? I'm just off on a complete.
Well, I think what you're saying is you have to choose between A or B, but I also believe that there's option C where you don't have to do any of it.
Sure. I mean, of course, that is that other option C that it's none of the above. Or whatever.
Yes, none of the above. Exactly.
None of the above. But I think pop culture addresses where these are your choices. If you want to be in the in crowd, if you want to be part of what's trending, you want to be an influencer and you want to be part of that culture, that world, then you have to do these things. And there are already choices made for you. It's a matter of either you do them or you don't do them. And if you don't do them, well, you're just not part of that wave. And if you do them, then everyone else is like, oh, they're just trying to, get more likes and more followers and more of this and more of that. Oh, she doesn't really care and she just wants more attention, blah, blah, blah. The superficial aspect of it. But that's what I'm saying is that contributes to the rot, because then people will care more about that than about really important substantive things,
Yeah, well, that's where they lose themselves, right?
Sure. So, I mean, the question that becomes is that an okay thing to do, or is that part of the problem as far as society is concerned?
Well, I feel like that's a personal preference, because you can either choose this one thing that intertwines me with my community, or I can go a different route and just stick to myself. And for most people, those two coincide. What I want to do automatically pushes me deeper and deeper into my culture.
Well,
for some people, it doesn't.
But what you want to do, I think that also contributes to this problem, in that people find it too easy to do what they want to do at the expense of things they have committed themselves to do. For example, it's too easy to quit a job. It's too easy to get a divorce. Oh, you know what? You don't want to be that girl that I was with before. We'll get a divorce. Or women do the same thing. I mean, or whoever. The thing is, those choices and the ease to make those choices, which could be influenced by pop culture, it could be influenced by society itself or friends or anything that's going on in that person's life, push them, or really makes it easier for them to step away from their obligations and into something else, something that is like a fantasy, something that they think is going to be, the old saying, grass is greener on the other side. You get over there, there's still dog crap there too. Dog shit in that yard too, man. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail what you were saying. Go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. Well, it's an interesting point. I'll say that.
So, do you have a remedy or a flip side?
Well, that's where you have to ask yourself, where do I see myself in the long term? Is what I'm doing right now conducive to that? This self-analysis has to be there, because without that, like I said, you're completely lost. You're in a maze. You don't know which way you're going.
Let's face the reality, though, Ashwin. People don't make those. They don't come to those, those moments where they have to reflect unless they're hit with some kind of humility. They have to humble themselves, and something has to humble them in order for them to reach that. For some people, I'm not saying everybody, but there are a lot of people that, until they hit the wall, until they find themselves in a dire situation, until they are in need of a friend, will they really even think about what's really important in the world? And what is really important in the world? If I were to ask you to list the 3 things that are the most important to an individual in this world, what would be on that list?
Number 1 is family. Family comes before everything else. Number 2 is yourself, and that includes your finances, your health, whatever the case might be. And I would say 3rd is ambition.
So your family, yourself, and your ambitions. Okay. How does the world at large fit in? And would that be high up on the list?
Elaborate. What do you mean?
So, like, there are people who are selfless. So they'll go and volunteer at the soup kitchen, or they'll be volunteer at a rec center, or people that go and help the old lady whose husband died 5 years ago and has trouble getting up the steps. And what, how far on the high up on the list would that be in order for someone to be for somebody to be important? Because or you're taking care of family members. You mentioned family being number 1. We're finding more and more people are sending their elderly into retirement homes or assisted living homes before they're ready to.
Well, that depends on you, right? Because these 3 things, I didn't say them in order. It's just they can be exchanged either way. There are certain times where family is number 1. There are certain times where you put yourself first. It depends on where you are and what you're doing at the moment. But in general, for me at least, these are the 3 things that I focus on the most.
It's interesting you brought up family, because when I was growing up, Hispanic families especially, they would, the idea of sending abuela off to an old folks home was just, it was a non-discussion. We just didn't discuss those things, and I think in some corners of Hispanic culture, that's still very true. I don't know about other cultures. I can only speak to the ones that I'm familiar with, but I know that American culture, they'll ship the old man off and the old lady off like with the quickness. They will. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because I guess in where I'm coming from, family, like you said, was very close knit. Everybody was together all the time. Me growing up in a house with 8 siblings, imagine. I'm the youngest, so I always got like the short end of the stick.